So without further ado, I'll give it over to you, Jon. If you want to take things away, you're going to do some Q&A at the end, is that right?
Yeah, I'm hoping to make this as conversational as possible. So hopefully it's only 30 to 40 minutes, or I'll try to do pauses in between and try to get out of the slides and come back here. So if you want to do video, by all means, we can kind of talk face to face. If not, totally okay as well. So I will be using, there's like one interactive part, so I'm going to post a link here for you to take. So should be good.
Okay, and maybe give just a brief intro on yourself and company and so on.
Yeah, Jon Kohrs. Maybe the easiest way to introduce is I find myself in the middle of corporate transformation all the time. So I work with a lot of different companies now. Used to work at the Federal Reserve, then worked for H&R Block, worked with D for a year or so back in 2015. And then started working with a consulting group, worked with GHA Insurance and some other brands. And then I've been working with a company called Econic, do a lot of work in the kind of corporate transformation space using design, but also have a number of different clients myself. So I find myself in the middle of just corporate change, as probably most of you do. I love trying to design spaces and processes for teams to work differently. That's kind of a lot of what I've been doing, probably much like every other person on this call. UX and design strategists often find themselves in that role. My why of what I do, I love to curate the creative potential in people. And I just love how people can join together and bring their unique personalities and perspectives, and how to give equal weight and balance to that. So astrologically, I'm an Aries and a Libra. So for some reason, it just kind of fuses together in this whole thing. So this whole talk about empathic design, I'll get into this. This is really kind of a first shot to see what people think even of this topic. For those who know Sarah, she ran design thinking at Sprint, worked at my Sidewalk for a while. Sarah and I used to talk a lot about emotionally intelligent design and EQ design, and there's a couple of books about that. But I'm really, really passionate and interested and just curious about the space of empathy and how do we understand emotional intelligence and how do we design things. So this is kind of where this talk tries to go to. So I'm going to jump in and share some slides, and we will dig in. So empathic design, because it is the working title of this. I start most talks and workshops I do with just, what do I want you to know, feel, and do as part of this? You guys are investing an hour of your time in this, and I hope it's valuable and there's some behavior or something you can do with this content. So what I hope to get out of this talk, and what I hope to share today, is really, I hope you to know a little bit more about some design practices, but not your typical journey mapping or persona development, or more about how do we use design as a way to make teams more present. And I'll kind of get into the importance of presence in the design process. A lot of you, I'm sure, we're going to talk about being empaths and highly sensitive people. I'm sure many of you, maybe all of us on this call are. And I'm sure as you go through new product development or existing product development, you think, oh my God, why aren't people listening? Like, how can they not feel this problem? Why are they doing this? And I felt that way. And a lot of times you just feel alone and you feel like you're wasting your time and nobody's listening. And if you're one of those people, I want you to know you're not alone. And hopefully in this talk, you'll be able to feel a little bit of that you have a tribe. Afterwards, there's just some things I have that I've been trying the last couple of years as I've thought through EQ design and kind of empathic design, however we want to label this. There's a few really tiny things that I've been trying that I hope are beneficial to you. And if there are things you're already doing, great. Like, how do we share them in this group? So again, I do not have all the answers. I really don't. This is just kind of a current state of where my mind is around this topic. But I hope it drives some more questions at the end of this. So Again, I don't pretend to have all the answers, and hopefully we can have a conversation around some of these things. So empathic design, in the abstract, I talked about highly sensitive people, or HSPs. So what I want to do is I want to, in the Zoom, if I can copy and paste this, where's chat? I'm going to post a quiz, and I'm curious if you guys want to, jump in, open that link while I kind of describe this. And there's 12 questions, and it's just a questionnaire of how sensitive are you as a person. And a lot of times we think sensitivity is a bad thing. You're overly sensitive. You take issue to too many things. But HSPs, there's a very specific definition of a highly sensitive person. And I'll talk a little bit more about later why they're really important in the design process. But I want you to take the quiz. And for those that want to share what flower they were at the end, you absolutely can. So as you're taking this quiz, I'll go through a little bit more of an HSP. We all have kind of a boundary around us. You can call it like an auric field, or just an emotional boundary, something that kind of protects us. And over time, we start to build this boundary to kind of keep things out and keep us in. We learn these based on behaviors and interactions with other people. As you're taking the quiz, there's a lot of questions about sensitivity to movies, or sensitivity to how much work gets thrown on top of you, or interruptions, or even how much you feel in certain circumstances. HSPs, and if you are an HSP and you understand the depth of that, you are hyper attentive to all these different stimuli around you. And it's almost like they hit you in a much deeper way. Sometimes I've been with coworkers that, they're sensitive to smells, and they're sensitive to things getting thrown on their plate. In the business world, sometimes we can think this is a disadvantage. You need to be more resilient. You need to be tougher. But highly sensitive people have this attunement, and they can feel all of these things around them. If there's increasing chaos, it starts to suddenly just get inside of them, and it's really hard for them to start to function. They almost start to get into a freeze mode, or shut down. And HSPs are incredibly important in the design process. They crave simplicity. They are very attuned to the experience. They can feel all the parts of it. They can describe the jarring aspects of it, and they can do so in a way that other individuals may not be able to. Also, HSPs, if they're in your team, are very sensitive to what you're designing and how are you designing for other people, and what are the rough edges that may start to distract somebody, especially in today's age where people are multitasking and juggling lots of different things. HSPs can really help shape your product and how can it conform into the ecosystem and the surroundings. So HSPs, hopefully you've taken the quiz by now. Curious if anybody wants to share what type of HSP they were, or if you are an HSP, to kind of describe your experience. Any takers?
Sure. Heck, I'll share, John.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
My score was 3.3. So I'm in the low medium.
Yeah, that was the orchid, or that was the tulip.
That was the what?
No, they give you like a flower at the very end if you read it.
Oh, I have, yeah, tulips.
Yeah. Was there anything in the quiz that you said, oh, absolutely, this was extremely?
No, not really. I just didn't think there probably wasn't enough questions.
Yeah, this was a shorter one. I can post more if people are interested on the psychology of it and how this one came to be, but a lot of them are around 20 questions. This was the shortest one possible.
Yeah, just to get done. So yeah.
Yeah. I can tell you the background on tulip, dandelion, and orchid there. It's kind of based on resiliency. I'll send you the article and you can peruse through it. But any orchids or any dandelions?
I actually got orchid.
You
Yeah.
did? Okay. How do you feel about that?
Based on the questions that were asked, I agree that there probably weren't enough questions for it to be really in depth, but based on the questions, it does make sense. I've always been really interested in, the empathy, emotional part of design. So that's why I thought this talk was really interesting. But yeah, whenever I heard about the description for highly sensitive people, that's what really drew me. Yeah, there are some things that my brain I feel is particularly sensitive to, but then there are some things that don't really bother me the way they might other people. So
Yeah.
It's pretty complex.
If you talk to an HSP, and I know a few, I'm right at the lower end of the orchid. So there's some things like I can do movies, but in a work environment, I have to have it dark and confined. And if somebody comes in and interrupts it, my nervous system just starts to. So HSPs will say their nervous system just gets lit up and it's like they just start to shut down and there's just too much. They'll say, most of the world is desensitized. They don't understand how movies can be so jarring and how there's horns on cars and how there's traffic going everywhere. They want a very simple, non-electrified life. So any other orchids? Peter, you said you're an orchid?
Yeah, I just finished it. I'm a low orchid, I guess. Also, okay. What you were just saying, definitely resonates with me as well. It's kind of like car horns and stuff are awful.
Yeah, we all have some level of sensitivity, and if you're a dandelion, that's totally okay. None of it's good or bad. Some people are they're hardwired. They're just more sensitive. And a lot of times these individuals hide. It's like, in a corporation, you're taught not to be sensitive, to be resilient, to be tough, to get things done, to be productive. But that sensitivity is a superpower, especially in the design world. So thank you all for taking that quiz. So there's two sides of this. Empathic design, there's HSPs and there's empaths. How many of you I think we can raise hands. How many of you have heard of kind of what is an empath? Maybe we'll do a quick chat. Does anybody want to try to kind of in chat, what is an empath? Anthony gave a thumbs up. How would you define an empath? Anybody care to take a shot? Anthony, what do you think? You kind of gave a thumbs up. Do you want to try to give a definition?
I guess it would be somebody who can get in another person's shoes and understand their situation, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And thank you, Megan and Libby as well. Yes, very, very, very close. Sometimes it's almost a little creepy, the definition. You can read a lot about empaths online. It is different than empathy. As you think about empathy, it's I have a relevant experience in my life. I can put myself in your shoes and I can kind of contemplate what that means. Sympathy, I almost pity that. Sympathy can sometimes be negative. It's, oh my goodness, you're going through this. I can think through it. Oh, I'm so sorry you're going through that. Sympathy has a bit of pity around it. What empaths are is, again, you're in this circle. You have this kind of boundary around you. This boundary is really thin. So let's say Tom is feeling extremely sad today. If I'm around Tom, I'm going to feel his sadness. It will literally, my experience of his sadness will be identical to his experience. It's like his emotions bleed outside his field. They go through my boundary and I can pick up every single thing he's feeling. It's not relating with your mind. It's not using a relevant experience. Tom's sadness comes from maybe something else. But I'm picking up exactly his feelings and they're part of me. As an empath, oftentimes what you'll do is this sadness then triggers your own experience as a secondary effect. So then you'll bring in other moments of your sadness, which will make you sad, which then almost like double affects what's happening inside of you. But an empath can literally feel the feelings of other people. Some empaths can feel what's around them in terms of like nature. Some other empaths can feel groups and collective. Sometimes you'll hear a definition of empaths as the ability to feel energy outside yourself and to bring it inside of you. And again, I know this sounds woo-woo and a little out there for those that maybe are introduced to empaths. There's a lot of research and study on empaths, especially the last couple of years. It very much is a thing. What I want to do is, why is HSPs and empaths important into the design process? Not as a spiritual thing in terms of empaths understanding other people or healing other people, but how can we, by understanding empaths, actually design things in a better way for people? So again, HSPs can feel everything around them, but they're very sensitive to it. They're different than empaths, but again, that's important to the design process and understanding what our experience is doing to people that are highly sensitive to some of these edges that we may need to burnish or polish. And empaths are very valuable because they deeply want to understand and feel, and they're capable of expressing that feeling and understanding what customers are going through, sometimes without them ever saying it. And that's really important as we start to design products. I do think we're in this age of, this is my pretending to care face. I'm a little jaded, and I totally appreciate pushback on this, but I feel like there's more and more teaching people how to be empathetic. Marketing companies are getting better and better at using messaging to connect to audiences. Persuasive marketing is very high. There's this fake empathy feeling, I feel like. It's like, how do I get you to buy a product without actually really caring? I think authenticity in brands is increasingly important, and more companies are striving for that, or more people want that because of the dissonance in the market with so many inauthentic brands. But it's rare when you find somebody that really, really, truly cares. And again, empaths and highly sensitive people have this ability, this innate ability to really just understand what you're feeling. And I'll talk about a case study as I kind of frame this a little bit, but at the end of the day, what I found the last year, especially with COVID and working with a large healthcare client, is, especially in healthcare, people want to experience genuine, real, authentic care. And how they define that is, do you see me? Do you really understand me? Do you feel what I'm feeling? And are you designing in a way that actually really supports me? And especially in healthcare, what I found is that's just not there every day. People aren't finding it. And with people being locked away in homes and just yearning for a human connection, I feel like there's this need to really genuinely care for the people we build products for. So I want to get into a little bit of a case study and some ideas around empathic design, but I want to stop on this introduction and just see if there's any questions people have that may have popped up from just this intro of HSPs and empaths and kind of a need for more genuine care in the market.
I just want to give the feedback that I could not agree more. I am also in UX and healthcare, and the lack of empathy is striking.
This healthcare client, that's one of their strategies is there just is no empathy. I mean, nurses are still that foundational part, but there's just no empathy in healthcare. And how do we really bring that back?
I'm client facing, and the clients are coming more to me with statements of, I really want to think about all of our end users. I want to be as useful as possible. But additionally, because I am client facing, I technically have two users. I have to design both to keep the client happy and to be useful to the end user. So that balance is a little rough sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Libby,
When,
that's a perfect. Oh,
Sorry,
go ahead,
John.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I just was, I was at, John, after I left Block, I went to IBM Watson Health.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if we had to really quite often, you were interviewing or you were talking with, either a caretaker, for a cancer patient or the actual cancer patient themselves. And especially when you were doing user interviews, we had a couple of really young UXers do some interviews, and it was a disaster because of they didn't really they couldn't put themselves in the person's, shoes and the lack thereof. But I think for the most part, I had a great group of people, and everybody, their empathy cup runneth over most of the time. Because of the kind of some of the things that we were working on. So, for the most part, we didn't have any problem with everybody having plenty of empathy and being empathetic.
Got it. Well, perfect. Well, thank you, Libby and Dee. Those are perfect segues. This is kind of act 2. I want to go through this quicker and then kind of set up some ideas. So, started working with a large healthcare client, and pre-COVID, we were starting to do kind of a design leadership program to help internal doctors and nurses and faculty, all the staff, but those key influencers and leaders start to think about how do you create new value for consumers, a la kind of innovation. So brand new greenfield ideas. So we were teaching leaders in this program. They were going to go back into the hospital and then start to form internal business cases. COVID happens. We had this whole curriculum designed, keep 6 feet away. Everything changes, and overnight we had to shift the program. What it shifted into was a startup studio model. So instead of pushing culture change into this healthcare system and helping leaders be more ambidextrous was the call to action, being able to create new value and explore. It went back into the core team, which there were, I think, around 6 or 7 of us at the time. And we had to start acting like a studio. And for those that may not be familiar with a startup studio, you could kind of imagine this is when you do new product development, you got to kind of focus on a key arena or area. You got to discover what the problems are and who your customers really are. You got to go out and validate they really have a problem and you have a concept that could solve it. You got to go start to incubate some early, I'll use MVPs. And then as that you develop those products and scale. In a studio model, what you want to try to do is get as many from focus and go all the way into scale as fast as possible. And what a studio will do is it just reventures over and over and over and over. And you start to build a team that can run multiple ventures, get them to a place, and then come back and do it again and again and again. It's kind of like a startup assembly line, I guess, if you will. So you can tell how important empathy is in this process. 1, you have to go a long distance. 2, you have multiple concepts you're probably running or tracks you're running at the same time. And there's a lot more chances to be wrong. So empathy and really taking feelings and building them into your products is really important. So right when COVID happened, we shifted into this model and started to develop 4 different kind of focus areas that we wanted to take in 5 months to see how many real concepts could we validate in the market as fast as possible. So a really, really fun challenge with a 6-person team. Leading the way, the segment that we called was Uber Moms. And what we wanted to do was, we believe there was a big issue in how moms experience motherhood, not just pregnancy, and how supported they felt, especially during COVID. We call them Uber moms because these were highly anxious moms that had multiple kids that used a lot of services to make their lives easier, that were likely highly sensitive to this, that were exploring really different ways of experiencing birth and motherhood. So this was our kind of early adopter quote unquote. So it's with Uber Moms that we really had to start thinking, how do we facilitate not just rapid empathy, but rapid feeling? How do we get a team to act as almost empaths, to where we can interview really quickly, we can deeply understand their problems, understand those feelings, and start to come up with as many concepts as we can that start to address those problems and shift how we think about motherhood in the United States. Then we did this 3 more times. So again, we had to teach a team how to really start to do this that wasn't used to this process. So that was our business challenge. So, in 5 months, we did hundreds of interviews, 12 different readouts about research we were finding. We did, workshops to help integrate all this, trying to think through how do we operate in a different model with the startup studio. And again, as I've been in this space of trying to help companies act more like a startup and work this way, it's really, really, really hard doing new concept development. And I'm sure all of you have been in this role. And what I routinely find is the barrier is a lot of times we distract ourselves from feeling. And as an empath or a highly sensitive person, they feel all the time and they're used to that feeling. They're used to feeling very like a lot of sadness or guilt or pain. They can carry a lot of those feelings. I find in working with companies, just a lot of us aren't used to that. We've been desensitized and it's hard to carry those feelings. So when you feel sad, it activates your own sadness. It activates stuff inside of yourselves. And it's almost like we push that away because we don't want to feel all that. And I find in doing rapid concept development, this is the single biggest barrier. And how do you help teams rapidly feel something and use that empathy to design something? And I'm sure all of you, this is a no-brainer, but you probably see this all the time in product teams that are just forming. A lot of times we call this, cognitive biases. And we say, as you're designing a product, you have affirmation bias, or you have zero risk bias, or blah, 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 blah. I'm not the biggest fan of cognitive biases and how they distort our thinking. As I work with teams, I orient it towards really simply, are you distracted by the future or are you distracted by the past? Because if I can be present, sorry, I'm putting you on the spot here, Tom, but let's say Tom is really sad and as an empath, I feel it. Genuine care comes from me being as present as possible with Tom and feeling with him in that moment. I don't have to do anything, but just feel with him. When I step out of that, I either get distracted by the future or past. And I think cognitive biases are overcomplicated, and it can be as simple as where are you living in this really moment today? And as I start working with teams, kind of thinking about empathic design and how do we be present, I notice 4 key distractions. People get distracted by their ideas and by what's right. And a lot of times those are formed from a past orientation. And I find inherently in teams, there's this, I really want to be valued as a team member. And if I give the best idea, I'm going to be valuable. Or if I'm always right, I'm going to be valuable. And I find it takes people out of the present and they start to live kind of in this, I'm always the idea person, or I'm always what's right. So I need to always be in that zone. And sometimes when you're too far in that zone, you're not present with what you're actually feeling. On the other side, I find, people can get fixated or distracted by other people or by outcomes. It's like, we need to hit this date, or we need to create this much value, or we need to do this for Susie because if we don't, Susie's going to be mad. There's this future worry that if they do something incorrect, then they will, again, not be valuable. So they really get distracted by this. And as a team, I start to think about how far are you on the edges of that? And how far are you just constantly in a past or a future orientation because you're distracting yourselves from this kind of core presency where all the stuff is happening when we're talking to our customers. So again, I want to give this kind of model. And again, this isn't rocket science. It's probably pretty common and you probably see this a lot in your teams. But as a designer, I start to think about I'm not just designing for this end customer and these feelings that I feel in this interview. I'm really designing empathically for one of these four groups, either the ideators or the others or the outcomes or a blend of this. I have to design in a way in my team that I can pull them to be present. So I'm designing for presence within the team. So as I think about empathic design, and I want to get into kind of a few rapid fire practices, it's if I can bring people as present as possible to those feelings, and I can have them sit in those feelings as long as possible, that will start to penetrate a way that will unlock deeper ways to genuinely care and create value for their customer. And the longer I can keep them there to really feel it, the easier the process is going to be. So again, this is how I thought about kind of a startup studio model where we had lots of concepts that had to run really quickly. And our goal was, how do we create as much value with these as possible without getting distracted and going every which way? So 5 different kind of practices. I'll go through these. And again, I don't have the answers. This is a tip of the iceberg. And I hope we could just kind of have a conversation around, is this something valuable? And we need to think more about as UX professionals. So 5 different things. These were kind of things I've been trying. Synthesis around group feelings. In early concept work, how do you do things in sprints? And you're always gathering incremental feelings. Designing around an anchor, an emotional anchor. Throwing away old templates and actually getting into designing templates that connect more with the project and the anchor, and then rethinking how we do interview techniques. And Dee, I love what you said about interviewers and not being able to actually really connect and resonate with potential people. So I'll go through these quick, and I'd love to get what things you're trying, or if this is important to try things. So, a lot of times I've found if you invite people to interviews, sometimes they'll make it. And after the interview, in nearly every company, there's not really deep synthesis. It ends up being kind of like, what did you hear? What should we do next? What's the key decision? But we don't allow space for people to really say, what did you really feel in that interview? And what I found is when you have a really good interview, you literally feel what that person's feeling. They feel this genuine connection. They feel trust that they can go deep. And all of a sudden you just get goosebumps and you get like these hairs on the back of your neck and you think, oh my God, I have to solve this for that person. And as an interviewer, I think it's your job to help synthesize that feeling. So this is a simple wheel. Afterwards, when we got done with all the interviews, we just do a go around and say, inside of you, what surprised you? What was your intuitive surprise? In these interviews, what did you feel that was energizing, either within the person that you were speaking to, or just in general? What did you feel that was important to that person? What did they say that was repetitive? Where did you feel frustrated, or where did that customer feel frustrated? And kind of going around, we synthesize everybody's feelings and saying, hey, what was the core feeling that you felt across all these interviews? And again, this was one way to help start to allow that to come into a broader team. Here was kind of some of the synthesis from moms. A lot of things we heard were around guilt and support, just over and over, this fog. But guilt started to rise to the surface of them describing how guilty they felt and how bad about themselves they felt. As we started gathering feelings, eventually, you start to do ethnographic research, then you kind of find your customers, you do segmentation, then you start to do your problem discovery, a traditional research process. But then even as you start to get in to solutioning, what we did is we started to include feelings as part of solution sprints. So every 2 weeks we would do research and then do a readout. So even in concept testing, it was very high level solution interviews, but it was all based around like, what are you feeling? In the interest test, it was really around, what are the different feature priorities? What would this look like? What's the concept? But again, we baked it around continuing, like, what are you feeling as part of your journey? In the priority test, we did very high level design stories and prototyping, not usability, but just enough to evoke kind of a felt sense. And then how do you measure it? So within our early customer discovery into early concept work, everything was 2 weeks, bite-sized pieces that kept building onto this almost library of emotionality in how they were thinking. You use D-Scout. I don't know if many of you use D-Scout, but I love how they do, you can do express surveys and get video of people. You can really screen in, you can screen in HSPs and empaths to give you feedback. You can do conversations. They're just a nice mix. You can do diary studies. So if you haven't used D-Scout, I just think they have a lot of different ways to reach customers really quickly. So we did hundreds of interviews through this platform to try to gather that. Here were some of our research highlights, just every 2 weeks giving here's our experiment, but here's what we learned and why does this matter and what is the felt sense that we got from these customers. Again, here were some kind of concept snapshots that we did, but getting in front of ideators every 2 weeks and people that are distracted, it kept pulling people back into, okay, what are we designing for? Who is that person and what are the feelings within it? Next was kind of designing around a felt problem. You know, as we thought about problem statements and like how might we's and even concept statements, within each, they were all Mad Lib focused to make it a little bit more human speak. We didn't use templates and tools, but each one had a kind of a, which makes me feel, or how might we create this sense of emotion in people? So from the interviews, we baked in and kind of defined a key emotion that we were really designing for, and then back that through stories. So as we went into workshops, if the emotion was less than, how do you design around the opposite form, the positive, like the light form of that emotion? So how do we make moms feel more than, or more relaxed, or more connected? So again, it's all baking into, can you feel what they're feeling, and how do we create an opposite positive feeling of that to allow them to kind of get through those states. So again, this anchor became almost kind of like the seed underneath the persona. And we didn't go back to the persona that often. We kept referencing stories of guilt or stories of aloneness or stories of sadness. So as the team started to get used to this, that energy started going more and more into the process. And again, as we designed concepts, our concept pitches were very high level, saying, how do we create this positive emotion? And then that went into design stories that, again, tried to illustrate their narrative. So as we went back to customers, we would play back these stories to see, is this a real situation and what are you feeling? And then how does this start to counteract those? So again, this was so bite-sized and small, we could do this rapidly in kind of 2 week cycles. Next, what I find in a lot of teams is we go to, I don't know if there's a background there. There is one. Oh, there it is. You know, there's business model templates and value prop canvases and all sorts of other different things. And a lot of the startup or UX tools I find, they're very heady. And as soon as you start using them, you start thinking about, okay, what's the outcome? Or, okay, what's my idea? Or what's the right way to fill out this template? Or you start encouraging that distraction into how to do it in a different way. And sometimes it allows you to control the process too much. So a lot of times I rip things apart, and every single time we design a custom template. So here was a journey map template. Again, we did it as a circle, so there wasn't an outcome. We didn't include a lot of ideas in it because it wasn't about being right in it. We just said, what are the moments of friction, the moments of truth, and then what are the core emotions they feel as they go through these stages, and what do you call it? Standard kind of journey mapping process, but by reinventing it a little bit, we kind of started to break those distractions of having to have this be the perfect template or the right way to do it, or, you know, we've got to do a journey map that always leads to this outcome. I'm going through these quick. The last one I'll just go through and then we'll do questions is authenticity. As an interviewer, I find wearing a hoodie, not getting dressed up and having just a background that's kind of a mess is really authentic. And people can tell when you're being too polished. I do have a script, but it's really just trying to connect into that feeling and going as deep as you can. So this was Leah. She was one of our interviewers. And as we went through the process, we just kept going back to her time and time again. And I really started to understand her life and exactly what was going on. And I could share that life with other people in my team. And I started saying, remember Leah? Leah's going through this today. And boy, Leah gave us this feedback. Kind of thinking about it as I'm a storyteller and I'm trying to understand her story and her life, and just being a human and not an interviewer really helped us to go deeper into what she was going through. And although I do have kids, I'm not a mom. So this was a challenge is how can we connect deeply to moms that are going through a very vulnerable time in their life. So again, sharing these stories, and we could start to measure across this, how much do we understand their problem and how understandable and beneficial were some of the concepts that we were bringing, and how do we measure this at each piece and start to understand, are we really designing around the emotions important for her? So again, I don't have all the answers. These are just some very small practices I was trying, and I'm starting to reframe my thinking around as an empath or an HSP, and those individuals really feeling deeply with people and being sensitive to the stuff around them. How do we start to create an environment and a space with our team that they can be present with those feelings and start to feel those with our customer without being distracted and going in different directions? And how do we do that in the right way? So again, here are the questions that I'm currently thinking through. How do we include empaths and HSPs in the process? By screening in these individuals to get their feedback, but how do we think about them in our teams, and how do we leverage their superpowers? How do we facilitate teams feeling together deeply, and how do we understand the accuracy of that feeling? And then how do we stay present and not get distracted, especially when you're running ideas through the process fast, and we may have deadlines and outcomes and right processes, and how do we stay really present in the feelings and not get distracted? So again, these are my questions, and I'd love to get feedback on what you guys are thinking. Are these things you struggle with in your team? And how do you start to get people to really feel with our customers in a deeper way? Sorry, that was rapid fire. I know I threw that at you really quick. So I just wanted to kind of scratch the surface and then see what you guys thought.
Do you have any key practices like that you can sort of teach people or take them through in terms of like, okay, two people sitting in a room, one is you, one, doing the interview, and another is the interviewee. Like, what do you actually do with them to help them sort of access their feelings, right? Because, I think we're all very good at just like living in the day to day, like, doing the stuff, and we live on the surface, but to actually get below and access those feelings, it's not easy.
Yeah, two things. One, I've always been trained, find the early adopter. Here's the screening criteria. Find the people actively solving the problem. I go one step further and think, who are the HSPs and empaths that are in there that can really feel what's happening and describe it? And sometimes when I screen in people in DScout, you do like a video, like a 30-second video. And I say, explain how you felt about another brand, or explain how you feel about the problem. And as I screen in people, I can really feel who's really connected and who wants to share that. So that's one on screening. On the other, when I do interviews, I try to reduce all bias, and I try to get myself present. So I literally close my eyes before I do an interview, and I set the intention. And I say, I genuinely want to connect to you and understand what you're really feeling. So as I enter an interview, I try to get rid of any other individual distractions I may bring, because I want them to say something, or I want to be right about what I'm doing. I try to totally clear myself. And in that, I find I can be much more connective and create a space that they feel like I'm not leading them somewhere. But those are two simple things I've been trying. I would say interviewing empaths is tough, because an empath can feel what you're feeling. So if you want something, they're going to feel that you want that from them. Or if you feel like energized and agitated, they're going to feel that way. So you have to be really clear going into that interview. And if you are, you're going to get a lot of stuff back. But and I know that sounds weird to say, but I found it time and time again. You have to be really clear and genuine, just upfront with what you want to get out of it. Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about your internal team. You mentioned that there's like a 6-person team. And one of the things that we're thinking about is like, if it's even just designing a process like what you just went through, where we can research users and design and validate concepts and design products together. And so we want to do that in a cross-disciplinary way. I'm curious about what different disciplines, if there are different ones who are represented on your team, and if you find that like some of them are a little bit, it's easier to get access to their feelings in this way than others. So yeah, just if you wouldn't mind elaborating a bit on what that looks like.
Yeah, I found that as you get through kind of the discover section, I always think of like in terms of startup, then the startup team starts to form. And in that you have more of a product person, a technologist, a researcher, a marketing individual. That's kind of early stage. In discovery, we really just had kind of like a product owner, a lead researcher, and that was really kind of it, and a marketer in there. We kept it really high level. And then as it got, then we brought in other people. I would say if you have like a 12-person team, you're doing greenfield brand new concept development, that's really tough. Because having 12 voices in a room that aren't all present with what's happening, then people are swooping in and swooping out, and then maybe giving ideas, that's a really hard team to manage. I would say critical in any is if you have an empath in your team that loves interviewing and connecting, getting them up front and in a more leadership role of driving those initial customer insights is really, really important.
We have a question in the chat. Any suggestions on getting people to open up? I have stakeholders given to me and they can be difficult to open up. That's from Megan.
Good, excellent point. In internal stakeholders, I find it just depends how distracted and where, and I don't mean distracted as a bad way. I just, some individuals can be used to, I need to hit this outcome or I need to do this. And when you approach them, they're not present and engaged and opening up with you. There's a couple different things I use in my mind. There's a thing called method teaming that gets at like what energetically drives you. Is it empathy? Is it outcomes? Is it theory? There's a couple indicators. So I'm trying to see the world like where are they coming from and what lights them up, and then how do I connect with them around that? I think that's one. Another, I've been starting to look at Enneagram, and the Enneagram has subtypes. Within the subtypes, there's instincts. And if you can start to understand somebody's Enneagram, literally you can see the world in a completely different way. And if you can really feel how they see the world, and you express that and play that back to them, most times people will open up. If you are an empath, sometimes you can just feel that. You can feel how they feel about the world, and it makes it easier to connect. Other times you kind of have to logically think through it and watch them. But at the end of the day, I think just like customers, they want to be cared about and they want to be heard and seen. And the more you can just sit with a stakeholder one-on-one and say, okay, what's going on? What, where are you at right now? What would you like to see in this? It may take them a while to get to that level, but they will eventually once they trust you. Good question.
Thank you very much.
again, I've kind of boiled this down over the last year and a half is like, how do you just, I can't logically think of how do I get somebody to believe I care about them? How do I genuinely care, and how does a team genuinely care about either the people on their team or their customers? And how do you share that felt sense with them? And I think that's both what teams are wanting, and I think that's what our clients are wanting and our customers are wanting. And how do you enable that to happen? Dee, I'd love to hear your feedback. It sounds like you had a fantastic team at IBM that just, you guys all got it and you were highly empathetic or empathic.
Yeah, and I think it's the teaching the kids that were just right out of school how to do that effectively. I think was the only real challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, there was some cringe-worthy moments. We were interviewing both the caretakers, and people who had cancer. And at one moment, the poor person who was, she because we had both that we were looking at. She says, "Okay, so which are you? A caretaker, or a patient?" And she said, patient. And she says, "Oh, good," and blah blah, and just kept talking. And I was like, I'm looking, I'm on the other end of the phone, thinking, no, you didn't just say good.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, yeah. In this project, we had caretakers as well, and that is a really difficult. There's so much emotion behind a caretaker, especially new caretakers, and the individuals that their family that are suffering. There is an endless sea of emotion there. There's some like really rich things that we can do for caregivers that they just aren't getting today. So they're good interviews if you can connect, but if you're afraid of connecting at that level, I see a lot of interviewers distracting themselves and they make it more mechanical and they're just trying to get facts instead of like really trying to be in that moment with the caregiver that just feel alone. They don't know where to turn to. They're stressed out. Their family's banging on the door. They feel responsible. There's a lot there.
Well, and it's hard to interview somebody like that and try and get your questions in without seeming like you're not empathetic to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, that's too, like I've heard a lot of people talk about, interviewers, I don't want them to attach to me. I need to keep on this side. I'm going to go through and ask every question exactly the same. I disagree with it because every person's different. And the language somebody uses in an interview, I'm trying to mirror that back. And I'm trying to sense what they're feeling. And I'm adapting questions. And I don't want to be an interviewer. I want to have a relationship with you and just be a human and hear you.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Which brings me, I'd love to hear everybody's opinion, so like I won't let any of my researchers do an interview by themselves. I always have a note taker so that they can help, catch those little things that people say.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love to hear if, people have a note taker along with it to help hear those things that you don't necessarily always hear when you're interviewing.
Yeah, that's tough trying to do the interview plus take the notes and make sure you capture the feelings.
Well, they're typically not taking notes. They're usually using, something that is, going to give them back a transcript, so you're not necessarily taking notes if you're just doing it by yourself, but then you don't always hear the things that you might need to hear.
Yeah.
I do. And D-Scout does transcripts. What I do is I just try to sense the feeling and the emotion of it. And then afterwards, I just kind of process what I felt. And then the note taker keeps everything. Then we do the synthesis. Everybody shares their perspective. We kind of do that again. And then I rewatch some of the videos and then I write a report out about it all. And then we go and then we present that to the larger group. It's a lot of extra work, but it's like distilling all of that feeling back into, okay, here's what's happening. And then in the readout, I do 3 or 4 clips of kind of the most felt parts of the interview that you can, like, that I can really feel, and then hope that kind of exemplifies the summary. But
yeah, if I have to, I try and do kind of more of a mind map of the things that they're saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really smart. Well, I think we're over on time. Any final questions before we wrap? If not, thank you all very much. I hope there's some practices here that maybe you can take away. If nothing else, we could share back and forth. And I really do believe in empaths and highly sensitive people. And I think they really are important in this process. And I think we can get to a deeper level of having, you know, our customers that we build stuff for feel a specific way, and us to share that with them. So keep thinking about the topic and reach out anytime.
What's a good way to reach out to you, Jon?
Just email, just jonkohrs@gmail.com. I have no social media. I ditched it years and years ago. So that or my phone number, just text me, 816-666-1030. So.
Well, this is fantastic. Thank you so much. I think it's a really, like you say, it's really, really interesting topic. When there's such a lot going on in, you know, in the world, and kind of things are changing, there's a lot of feelings flying around.
Yeah.
And to access the deeper feelings is difficult because there's there's such a lot to manage. So thank you for taking a stab at this, and or more than that, sharing your expertise. I think it's a great conversation. Like I said, we will put this recording on our YouTube channel. So if you guys want to access that, check that out. You can access that from our website. So that'll be up in the next couple of days, and we'll have another event we'll put up on the website, I'm sure, very soon. So thank you to Jon, and good to see everybody as always, and take care and have a great rest of your day.
See ya.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Here.
Thank you. Thanks, Jon.
Hey, Jon, have you seen any of Amy Butcher's behavioral change?
I have, yeah, I have a little bit. Yeah, I saw that comment. Yes, yeah. There's also a good EQ book too that I need to finish reading. But
And what is that one?
oh, here, I'll send it to you. Let me look and see. It was emotional. Let me pull up my phone.
Being in Cambridge, I got to take a few classes from Amy at MadPow.
Really? Oh,
Yeah,
God.
it was amazing.
Yeah. This was maybe a year or two ago. Emotional Intelligent Design, Rethinking How We Create Products. Pamela Pavlicek. She had some YouTube videos 2 or 3 years ago, kind of starting to scratch this kind of concept. I went further into, I think there's EQ, but I think it's still a mind thing. I think empaths.
How do you spell her last name, Jon? P-A what?
Yeah, Pavliscak.
E-L-K? Check, okay.
SCAK. Pavliscak.
Okay.
Pavlicek. Anyway, thanks everybody. It's great to see you again, Dee.
Thanks. Yeah, you too.
See you.
Take care.
Thank you. This is a really great conversation.
Oh yeah. Yeah, glad you could join in.
Yeah.
And, glad you found it helpful.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm technically in class right now, so my teacher, Lisa sent this out, and so we could come to it, so.
Yeah, great. Yeah, she's actually on the board for the UXPA. She probably has told you that.
I think I've seen emails about it or something, but yeah.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll let you get back to your class. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thank you.